Just weeks after canceling its troubled Constellation-class frigate program, the U.S. Navy is ready to move forward with a new design. This time, based on the smaller but proven Legend-class national security cutter that today serves as the broadly capable centerpiece of the U.S. Coast Guard fleet. Now, the Navy hopes this decision will provide a new small surface combatant that can be produced quickly and in sizable numbers to provide a supplement to the branch's workhorse fleet of larger Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, while helping to increase the Navy's dwindling fleet numbers and offsetting at least some of China's rapidly growing numerical advantage in the Pacific. Of course, that was also the plan for the previous frigate effort, but shipbuilders Fincantieri Marionette Marine found themselves repeatedly saddled with design revisions and shifts in focus that were reportedly passed down from the Naval Sea Systems Command themselves, leading to pretty substantial cost overruns and delivery delays that now stretch to 3 years. Now, the Navy says, a different shipbuilder, HII Ingalls, will be able to convert their design for the existing Legend-class cutter into a full-fledged Navy warship and deliver its first vessel by 2028, meaning they claim they can design, build, and launch this new ship sooner than Fincantieri Marionette can deliver the first Constellation-class that's already been under construction since 2022. But with all this focus on getting these new ships into the water as quickly as possible, the Navy seems to have forgotten what it wanted these ships to do in the first place. With no anti-submarine capabilities, no vertical launch missile cells, and minimal air defense systems, America's new frigate seems to be little more than a Coast Guard cutter with a fresh coat of paint. Because, well, that's what it is. So let's talk about the Navy's new FFX frigate program that aims to correct more than 20 years worth of shipbuilding mistakes, and why they may be making all new ones in the process. I'm Alex Hollings. Welcome to Firepower. A few weeks ago, we talked in depth about the Navy's decision to cancel its problematic but strategically important Constellation-class frigate program. And while you don't need to watch that episode to fully appreciate our dive into its intended replacement, I do recommend you check that video out, as well as our coverage of the new frigate and the new battleship that have been proposed for the U.S. Navy, just to understand the broader context that led to this current predicament. But to summarize the situation as briefly as I can, the Navy was left to choose between two crap sandwiches. The first was a program meant to quickly deliver small but highly capable warships that had ballooned into something of a boondoggle. And the second was how canceling the chronically delayed program would make the Navy's dwindling ship number problem a whole lot worse. The U.S. Navy remains the largest in the world in terms of displaced tonnage, but in terms of hull numbers, or the number of targets, China's rapidly expanding People's Liberation Army Navy has already surpassed it. And when you include ships from the nation's militarized Coast Guard and maritime militia, both of which fall under the direct command of the PLA Navy, that numerical advantage expands to better than 2-to-1. And despite new shipbuilding efforts, America's Navy is currently shrinking, as older ships age out of service faster than new ships are being built to replace them. Today, the U.S. Navy has 295 warships in service, including 11 active nuclear-powered supercarriers, 9 more large-decked amphibious assault ships that can be used to deploy F-35Bs, as well as helicopters and ground troops, and the backbone of the fleet, some 74 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers. Now, these ships are equipped to engage in or support just about every aspect of modern warfare, with serious air defense, anti-submarine warfare, and long-range strike capabilities, making them well-suited for operating as a part of a larger formation in, say, a carrier strike group, as well as operating alone and unafraid in contested waters. But despite all of their capabilities, each of these advanced destroyers can only be in one place at a time, and their numbers just aren't sufficient to give every job its own destroyer. So, as you might imagine, the Constellation-class frigate was meant to be a small surface combatant with a very large role in America's maritime warfighting fleet. With more than 100 fewer sailors on board and a total displacement that's some 2,400 tons lighter than the Arleigh Burke class, the Constellation-class is equipped to fight well above its weight, effectively carrying the same sensors and heavy-hitting weapon systems as its bigger sisters, just in smaller quantities, boasting 32 Mark 41 vertical launch system cells, or about a third as many as a destroyer, 16 canister-launched naval strike missiles, a 21-cell Mark 41 launcher carrying RIM 116 rolling airframe surface-to-air missiles, and a 57mm naval autocannon capable of unleashing 220 5.2-pound high-explosive projectiles per minute and targets more than 9 miles out. Or, as one commenter very aptly put it, the Constellation was meant to be something of a baby Burke, meaning a smaller version of the Navy's incredibly capable Arleigh Burke class. And in order to field this new vessel quickly, the Navy opted to base it on the existing Franco-Italian Frem frigate that's already in service for Uncle Sam's European allies, with plans to change about 15% of the ship's design to better suit US Navy needs and regulations. That is, before the dark tentacles of scope creep began to wrap themselves around this effort. By the time the Naval Sea Systems Command was done introducing new design revisions and requirements, that 15% design modification had ballooned to revising 85% of the ship. And the delivery date for the first vessel had been pushed from 2026 to 2029, with cost overruns and delivery schedules left cascading behind it. So it made a lot of sense when Navy Secretary John Phelan announced the program's cancellation a few months ago, with the US set to now take delivery on only the first 2 ships of the class. And while the Constellation program was certainly troubled, this also meant having to take a nice big bite out of the other crap sandwich, a hole in the Navy's future force structure design that could be as big as 56 ships across. The Navy had planned to purchase at least 20 Flight 1 Constellation-class frigates, with long-term aspirations to maybe buy as many as 28 to even 38 more in a further upgraded Flight 2 trim. Now, with that class punctuated at just 2 hulls, the Navy needs to find a way to replace the ships it's lost on an extremely short timeline. And that's where this new frigate design, based directly on HII's Legend-class national security cutter, comes in. On December 19th, Navy Secretary John Phelan announced the planned acquisition of these new warships, with little in the way of specifics regarding capabilities and an extremely aggressive timeline. According to the announcement, the first of these new frigates will be delivered in what basically amounts to just 2 years, with the first slated to enter service a full year before the first Constellation class, which, again, has been under construction since 2022, can do the same. Now that would be an aggressive timeline for any big-ticket defense acquisition, but for the US Navy, well, that might just take a miracle. Now, according to the Senate testimony of Navy Vice Admiral James P. Downey, the commander of Naval Sea Systems Command, all of the Navy's shipbuilding efforts are currently an average of 1 to 3 years behind schedule as it is. So, what do we know about this cutter-turned warship, and how well can it fill the Constellation-class's intended shoes? Well, the Legend-class national security cutter is the largest in service for the U.S. Coast Guard, and it's been described by officials as the centerpiece of their fleet thanks to its large size and broad utilitarian design. The Legend-class measures 418 feet long and displaces about 4,600 tons, but the Navy's frigate based on it will be slightly larger at around 421 feet and displacing 5,240 tons. This is, however, still a lot smaller than the overweight Constellation, which stretches over 496 feet and displaces 7,291 tons. The Coast Guard's Legend-class cutters carry a crew of 113, but the Navy says their new frigate will carry 148, which means cramming 35 more sailors into roughly the same amount of space. But that's still far fewer than the 200 that would be required for the Constellation. Now, that significant reduction in size might not be a bad thing. the Constellation-class is already exceeding its own maximum weight threshold, and to some extent, it might even be necessary in order to meet the Navy's aggressive delivery timelines. The Legend-class cutter is powered by a combination of diesel engines and gas turbines, giving it a top speed of over 28 knots, that's about 32 miles per hour, and an unrefueled range of about 14,000 miles. Both performance figures that are being carried over to the FFX. Now that gives the smaller cutter-based frigate a higher top speed and much longer legs than the Constellation-class, which would likely struggle to reach its stated top speed of 26 knots and offers an unrefueled range of just 6,900 miles. However, the Constellation-class boasts a unique gas turbine diesel-electric propulsion system that can operate very, very quietly, making it better suited for anti-submarine warfare against torpedo-packing attack subs. In Coast Guard trim, the Legend-class design already accommodates the SLQ-32B electronic warfare suite, a 57mm main gun, a phalanx close-in weapon system, 4 50 caliber machine guns, and 2 additional M240 Bravo machine guns. And the FFX frigate is currently expected to be similarly lightly armed, with just a 57mm main cannon, a 30mm auxiliary cannon, a Mark 49 launcher with 21 rolling airframe missiles, and additional payload space for modular or containerized weapon systems. Now that means that unlike the Constellation-class, this new frigate will carry 0 vertical launch system cells at all, making it incapable of supporting carrier strike groups and an air defense capacity, and significantly limiting its ability to support strike operations against land targets without being equipped with additional modular weapon systems. In effect, the first FFX frigates will just be Coast Guard cutters with new paint jobs and little in the way of organic combat capabilities. But in the first few renders of the new ship released by the Navy so far, we can see how that additional deck space can be used for different weapon loadouts. At the rear of the ship, 4 angled quad-pack missile launchers are visible for what are all but certainly Norwegian-sourced naval strike missiles. These anti-ship cruise missiles carry a 260-pound titanium-cased penetrating blast fragmentation warhead and can hit targets as far out as about 190 miles using terrain contouring matching navigation systems that allow them to skim the wave tops as they fly. These missiles have been in service since 2012 for European allies and started testing on American littoral combat ships in 2014. But those missiles would have to be removed for any other containerized weapon systems. Now, the renders also show that intended Mark 49 launcher for RIM 116 rolling airframe missiles just ahead of the helipad. Now, these infrared-guided or heat-seeking surface-to-air missiles carry a nearly 25-pound blast fragmentation warhead and can engage airborne targets at ranges of about 5.5 miles, making them well suited for short-range air defense, but not much else. Interestingly, the Navy design seems to place this launcher right where the Coast Guard version positions its 20mm Phalanx Close-In Weapon System, or CWIS, which is omitted from the new frigate design. At the bow of the vessel, the Navy design retains that Mark 110 57mm main gun that was also present on the Constellation. Despite looking small by comparison to the massive guns of previous era warships, these guns are no joke. They're 31,000-pound systems that can fire 14-pound rounds with 5.3-pound projectiles at a jaw-dropping 220 rounds per minute, or more than 3 per second. But capable as they are, most of these weapons could be seen as fairly short-ranged and largely self-defense oriented. You could, as the Navy suggests, equip these vessels with containerized weapon systems, but with limited deck space, that means having to effectively choose one mission at a time. If you need your frigate to carry Tomahawk cruise missiles, it can't carry any anti-submarine warfare capabilities. If you need to hunt submarines, it can't strike land targets. And if you need to switch between missions, you'll need to sail all the way back to a friendly port and have your armaments swapped out. So let's talk about those VLSLs that this frigate carries none of and why they're so important. The Mark 41 vertical launch system really should be seen as the firepower backbone of any U.S. Navy surface ship. These missile launchers usually come in 8-cell modules, making it feasible to equip a single warship with anywhere from one module with 8 weapon cells to 16 modules for 122 missiles and interceptors or more. These cells, which come in 22-foot tactical length or 25-foot strike missile length, can accommodate a wide variety of weapon systems, including long-range surface strike weapons like the Tomahawk cruise missile, surface-to-air interceptors like the SM-2 and SM-6, ballistic missile interceptors like the SM-3, and even anti-submarine weapons like the RUM-139 vertical launch anti-submarine rocket. America's most modern destroyers, the Flight III Arleigh Burkes, carry 32 cells in their forward VLS modules and 64 cells to the rear of the ship for a total of 96. The Constellation-class again carries a total of 32, and the Navy's retiring Ticonderoga-class cruisers carry 122. But again, the FFX frigate heading for service today carries none. At least organically, but they could be loaded with Mark 70 payload delivery systems, or containerized VLS cells produced by Lockheed Martin. Each of these 40-foot containers provides a total of 4 VLS cells, which could optimistically mean you might be able to arm one frigate with maybe 12 VLS cells, though you would need a nearby destroyer or cruiser to enable the use of many of the weapons housed within them, because the frigate itself will only be equipped with the AN/SPS-77 Sea Giraffe medium-range multi-mode surveillance radar. And that is a real problem for these new frigates, and, well, for the Navy. As we've discussed on this channel before, one of the biggest reasons for the Navy's interest in the Constellation-class in the first place was to find a cheap way to offset a big reduction in VLS cells caused by the impending retirement of its largest missile-packing vessels. So let's run through the numbers. The Navy's 7 remaining Ticonderoga-class cruisers have 122 VLS cells each, for a total of 854 cells. Its 28 Flight 1 and 2 Arleigh Burke destroyers provide a total of 2,520 cells, while the 44 newer Flight 2A and Flight 3s add another 4,224. So all of the Arleigh Burkes combined provide around 6,744 missile cells. 3 more Zumwalt-class destroyers give the Navy 240 more cells, while its 24 Virginia-class attack subs provide 288. And finally, just 4 Ohio-class guided missile subs add another 616 cells to the Navy's inventory. And altogether, this shakes out to around 8,742 total vertical launch missile cells distributed across the entire United States Navy on roughly 110 surface ships and submarines. But with all of those Ticonderoga-class cruisers and Ohio-class cruise missile subs slated to retire by 2030, that represents the combined loss of nearly 17% of the Navy's entire arsenal, or roughly a reduction of 1,470 vertical launch system tubes. If you were to arm every new FFX frigate with 3 containerized missile systems for a total of 12 VLS cells per ship, America would have to build more than 122 new frigates just to match the firepower the U.S. Navy is expected to lose in the next 4 years. And I don't think I need to tell you that's impossible for a whole bunch of reasons. Now, to be fair, these concerns have been addressed by Navy officials since the FFX announcement, but to some extent, their comments seem to suggest lost focus on what really matters. Not ship counts, but the warfighting capacity that they can deliver. I'm going to quote Chris Miller, the executive director at Naval Sea Systems Command, from a Q&A he did at the Surface Navy Association's annual symposium earlier this month. Quote, "We're going to evolve it over time. Everybody keeps asking me, what about this? What about that? You know my answer. My answer back is, I care about getting this ship into production and then learning, adapting, and figuring out what this ship needs to grow into. The vision here is we will have a capability in a box. I think you will all agree that we've come a long way in our ability to use shipping containers, and I'm excited. And one could argue that Miller has already addressed concerns about the frigate's lack of advanced sensors and armament, emphasizing that subsequent changes will be made to the frigate's design as requirements become more apparent. I'll quote him again. If one of those things is something that we need to get into the design of the ship, it is something that we will go consider. We will figure out what has to be done, but we'll do it in a smart, controlled way. I'm trying to control the appetite. And to be clear, controlling the appetite is exactly what the Navy needs to get new frigates into the water. But to some extent, this approach seems more like a crash diet than effective appetite management. I mean, building ships that can't support modern combat operations at a time when the Navy's most pressing threat comes in the form of a numerically superior, technologically advanced, and well-funded adversary does not do much to improve the combat calculus for America's surface fleet. But don't be mistaken here. Making design changes to add VLSLs to subsequent flights of frigate production is absolutely likely to happen. But if that's the plan anyway, why not spend the money now and produce the ships that the Navy actually needs right from the start, rather than waiting through the first batch of production to then invest in design revisions just a bit further down the road while leaving the first production frigates relegated to low-stress interdiction operations and the like. If not VLSLs, then how about adding a sonar array and anti-submarine warfare suite, something that could make these ships really viable or useful in a modern conflict? Of course, it's easy for me to be critical of the Navy's decision-making processes on the tail end of more than 2 decades worth of failed littoral combat ship and frigate design efforts. And it's important for those of us on the outside of these decisions to remember that it's the job of today's Navy leadership to take what is objectively a crap sandwich of a situation and turn it into a positive outcome. When facing a quagmire of the magnitude that is the Navy's current shipbuilding woes, finding a single realistic solution that everybody agrees with is even less likely than getting a new warship built on time in the first place. That is to say that just because I think the omission of VLSLs and anti-submarine warfare capabilities in the first flight of this new frigate is an objectively bad idea, I do have to acknowledge that simply focusing on the number of VLSLs and their distribution in the field is also overly simplistic in today's world. In reality, America's shipbuilding problem isn't a problem at all, but rather a whole host of problems that have been compounding since the end of the Cold War. And that means we won't find a solution, but rather we need a whole host of solutions that can create compounding effects in the years ahead. The new FFX frigate may well be among that host of solutions, as are uncrewed ships like the 132-foot-long medium unmanned surface vessels entering service this year, and even smaller drone speedboats like the Navy's entertainingly named GARCs that we have a whole video on if you're interested. So, what do you think? Is fielding a new frigate without VLSLs or anti-submarine capabilities worth it? Could pairing these ships with new drone platforms make them more effective in the fight? Or what type of ships do you think the Navy should focus on building? Sound off in the comments below and let me know. I am always surprised by how smart you guys are. And with that ends yet another edition of Firepower from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.